Well, hi everybody. Welcome to the Firewall. I'm Bill Whittle. You know, many of my conservative friends and I are active in and big supporters of the Tea Party movement, and many of us seem to share a recurring, very similar experience. Conservatism, especially Tea Party conservatism, has been so vilified by the mainstream media. Journalists self-identify as liberal about 10 times more often than they do conservative, that many times we'll have our liberal friends, or sometimes total strangers, ask us to explain our horrible, knuckle-dragging, racist, extremist, whack-job views. And when we manage to do this calmly and clearly, which is difficult sometimes, I admit, given all the propaganda, well, more often than not, actually a lot more often than not, reasonable people will look at us with a kind of unique expression and say something like, well, that doesn't seem so crazy at all. I actually agree with a lot of that. So let's recap for our conservative friends and introduce to our liberal ones some of the key points of what we conservatives, especially Tea Party conservatives, would call our core beliefs. And we'll start with the two biggest ones, small government and free enterprise. Okay, why do we like small government? Well, the first and most important thing you need to know about us is that we don't believe that human nature can fundamentally change. You may not hear this a lot, but when you get down to it, it really is the basis for conservatism in general. We don't think people are perfectible if only they could make the right laws and rules. We believe that human beings, like every other creature on the earth, are motivated primarily by their own self-interests. Now, many modern people see this belief that we have, that human nature is fundamentally flawed and selfish and essentially unchangeable, as cynical and pessimistic. On the contrary, it is this belief that generates a society with the checks and balances against the natural human bastardliness that basically wants to tell other people what to do. These checks and balances prevent the accumulation of too much power in the hands of too few people, and that defiance of these checks and balances by the current political class of both parties is the real threat that the Tea Party movement is a response to. Because all you have to do is open a history book with just the most basic sense of fairness, and you will discover time and time and time again that the very same ideas being tried by big government today, ideas which we call progressive, have been tried in one form or another all the way back through recorded history, and they have always failed because they are based on what people hope and wish that human nature is instead of what it really is. You know, the British tried big state socialism in the 60s and 70s. It was a disaster. The Russian Revolution of 1917 was about remaking human nature into the new Soviet man who would share everything from each according to his ability and to each according to his need. They had to kill anywhere from 30 to 50 million people. 50 million people is 500 Super Bowl stadiums filled with innocent men, women, and children before they realized it just wasn't working. The Chinese communists tried the same thing, at least another 50 million killed and starved to death to bring about that socialist utopia, and it failed. It was a disaster. Cuba, smaller scale, same disaster. The French Revolution was fought for the belief that they could make what they called the new man, perfect and virtuous, once free of religion, income disparity, and all the rest. Now, in order to bring about that paradise, thousands of people had to be guillotined each week in what was called the Great Terror. And on and on and on it goes. The Romans, in 150 BC, were promoting these same progressive ideas. There's nothing progressive about progressivism. The belief that you can get something for nothing, that you can get the government to take something by force from other people and give it to you, like the money for your health care, for example, has been tried many, many times before, and it has failed every time. No, my friends, there's only one really progressive idea, and that is the idea of legally limiting the power of the government. That one genuinely liberal, genuinely progressive idea, the why in 1776, the how in 1787, is what needs to be conserved. We need to conserve that fundamentally liberal idea. That's why we are conservatives. By now, you probably think that we conservatives hate the government, but that's not true. We're law and order people, and we're all in favor of limited government to enforce responsible rules of behavior and to pay for a few very specific kind of things that are outlined in the Constitution. We're not against government. We will support small, limited, reasonable, responsibly run, frugal government, and we're willing to pay for that. What we are against is a giant, all-powerful, all-controlling state that thinks it is entitled to as much of your money as it wants and can make whatever laws it sees fit to impose with or without your consent. We conservatives think that is disgusting and horrifying. You know, even the smallest things that the government touches are fraught with this attitude. Think about it. How often do you, as an American citizen, get to interact directly with your government? Well, you get to do it when you get called for jury duty, when you have to get a passport, say, when you go to the DMV to renew your registration or to take a driving exam, and you get to do it at the post office. How do you feel about those experiences, going to the courtroom or the passport office or the DMV or the post office? Do you feel that the people there are deeply concerned about not wasting any of your time? Do you enjoy the atmosphere? Are you happy with the level of customer service you get from your government? No? Well, too bad for you, buddy. What do they care about these things? Those people aren't going to lose their jobs for being slow or rude. What are you going to do? Go to another DMV? Which brings us to the second major point that we conservatives feel is essential, and that is the liberating power of private business and free enterprise. Far from being the source of all evil, we think that private businesses are far better than big government simply because government can take your money at gunpoint, but businesses have to persuade you. Dealing with a private business is a free will transaction. Let's go back to the DMV example. What do you do if you don't like sitting at the DMV? Well, you can't go to another DMV. There's only one DMV, and that's the one run by the government. You're stuck. Some guy can't get your business by opening a faster, nicer DMV across the street and charge you less for better service. If he could, he would, and he'd make millions of dollars doing it, and your life and mine would be better for it. Look, again, don't take my word for it. If you don't want to wait in line at the post office, can you go to another post office? Well, these days, yes, you can. And FedEx, UPS, and all the rest have made a ton of money and made our lives better and easier. This miracle is called competition. And we conservatives like competition, not because we're mean and like to hurt puppies, but because of the results. Because the people running those evil, evil businesses know that they have to convince us to give them our money. They can't just take it from us at gunpoint like the noble, well-intentioned government can. And because we give a business our money out of our own free will and can go somewhere else if we're not satisfied, the private sector makes every single transaction of the day better for every one of us. Cleaner, faster, more polite, better service. It's just a difference of philosophy. You know, Nancy Pelosi said recently that we need to raise taxes because Americans want a job bill. Now just think about that. She wants to take money from the people that make jobs, that would be businesses and investors, and make them take the money that they would have used to open new factories, buy new trucks, and hire new workers, and instead give that money over to the government. Then the government, of course, after buying the Robert Byrd Center for the Performing Arts and all the rest of the kickbacks and earmarks and payola, will then take that trickle, all that's left of that once mighty river of private money, and spend it on shovel-ready projects that nobody really wants, where a $50 million project ends up hiring, let's say, 30 people. Isn't it better to just let people keep more of their own money, to wisely grow their own companies for the selfish and greedy reason that they'd like to be better off themselves? Doesn't that make more sense? Makes more sense to me. When it's all said and done, it's just that and nothing more. That's the Tea Party philosophy. People aren't perfect or perfectible. We in the Tea Party revere the Constitution because it limits the power of people who go into government because they crave power over others. And we prefer business to government because if you don't like the way a business treats you, you can go to another business. You don't like the service that the government provides, you don't get to go to another government. Next time, we'll talk about why we despise elitism and how even the smartest people on the planet suffer from a failure of intelligence where something as complex as the economy is concerned. And we'll also talk in future segments about how wealth can be created out of thin air. So much of this Tea Party movement is just simple common sense. And if you want to support messages like this one and keep them coming, you can become a citizen producer at declarationentertainment.com and help take back your culture. Hi everyone, welcome to The Firewall. We'll see you next time. I'm Bill Whittle. The Firewall. You know, one of the things that we conservatives, especially Tea Party conservatives, are most suspicious of is this growing trend towards elitism, and we have pretty good reason to be suspicious of it. Dedicated man of principle, Arlen Specter was a Republican from 1965 until 2009, when it became clear to him that his Senate seat for life was in danger, so he switched to being a Democrat so as not to deprive the great republic of his once-in-a-generation talent. Charlie Crist down in Florida took millions of dollars from Republican donors until he was defeated in the Republican primary, and so he decided to run as an independent so as not to deprive the great republic of his once-in-a-generation talent. And up in Alaska, Republican Lisa Murkowski, defeated in the primary, is also running as an independent so as not to deprive the great republic of her once-in-a-generation talent. Miss Murkowski has only been a senator for about 8 years, having been granted the fiefdom by her noble father Frank, Duke of Alaska, whose noble lineage goes back a respectable 30 years or so. These people are all pikers, of course, compared to the late Robert Byrd, Democrat from West Virginia, who was elected U.S. Senator a few months before I was born, way back in 1959. And, of course, the Democratic Party's late Crown Prince himself, Teddy Kennedy, who, descended from the bluest blood of all, never had a job that didn't entail spending other people's money and creating the rules and regulations that other people had to live by. What is it about all of this that seems vaguely and unpleasantly familiar? It smells a bit like a ruling class, doesn't it? Well, suppose you lived in medieval times, and like most people, you wanted good food, fine clothes, maybe a smallish mansion out in the country, and to be waited on hand and foot before coming to the unpleasant realization that acquiring these things requires an awful lot of hard work. Bummer. But then you get the brilliant idea of raising an army to get other people to do all of that for you at the point of a sword. A few quick and bloody campaigns, and you and the fruit of your magnificent loins are set for life. Elitism, modern elitism, is just the old-fashioned, ancient, productivity-stealing corpse of aristocracy and nobility, given a fresh slathering of pancake makeup, a Harvard degree, say, or a place out in the Hamptons, to look good at the viewing. We call the army of servants today congressional aides, and the exclusive carriage rides and fox hunts are called limousines or fact-finding missions, but the moral equation is the same. You do not have a right, the divine right of kings, let's say, to rule over other people because of who you are. Now, politically, there's something interesting about people who throughout history have supported elitism. For example, Bill Maher has said that he's in favor of rule by the liberal elite, but of course, that's because Bill Maher is one of the liberal elite. He despises common people like you and me. He is, however, generously willing to assume the mantle of nobility and tell the rest of us knuckle-dragging, flag-waving, racist idiots how to lead our lives. Be more than a little suspicious of people who say the best thing for people like you is to put the power over your lives into the hands of people like them. But the real issue here when it comes to rule by the elite is the practical argument, whether or not it actually works. And it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is so obvious that you have to be fantastically intelligent not to see it. Take the 10 smartest guys in the world, the 10 brightest people we have today on planet Earth, and then tell them that they have to make the decisions to grow the economy. They have absolute authority and get to decide everything. Well, first of all, the 10 smartest guys in the room are not going to agree on what to do. That alone should tell you something very important. Second, while it is true that every one of them is far more intelligent than people like you or me, there is one stubborn fact that remains. There are several, scores, maybe hundreds, of specific areas in which you know more than the 10 smartest guys on planet Earth. Maybe you know how to make a fly fishing lure better than any of them. Maybe you know more about the right temperature in which to store fresh milk. Maybe you know more about the details of the Battle of Cannae on August 2nd in 216 BC. Or maybe you better know how to fly an instrument approach in quarter-mile visibility. There will always be something, actually there will always be many things, that you know better than the smartest people in the world. Now, the American economy is simply the set of tens or hundreds of small transactions taken by 300 million people. That comes out to billions, thousands of millions of individual decisions being made every day. How do 10 Harvard-educated whiz kids in a very nice office in Washington, D.C. know, for example, more about what it takes to run a gas station in Boise, Idaho, than the guy who actually runs the gas station in Boise, Idaho? How can this economic team of geniuses know what he pays for his groceries, what percentage of his income goes to college for however many kids he has, what his savings amount to, where he plans to go on vacation, what year he plans to retire, and all of the thousands of other factors that make up that individual man's decision to set the price of gasoline for his little neighborhood up in Boise? Now multiply those thousands of factors across hundreds of millions of individuals and realize that they're all tied together. The price that man in Boise sets for gasoline determines what the man a few blocks down has to pay out in costs to fuel his trucking company, or whether or not the woman at the next pump spends or saves enough in gas to afford to buy a flat-screen TV at Best Buy. Who is smart enough to track all of that, let alone interpret it, let alone plan it? No one is that smart. No 10 people that smart, no 1,000 people are that smart. The level of intelligence of the 10 smartest people in the world is not 10 times or 100 times or 1,000,000 times less than what is needed to run an economy. The 10 smartest people in the world are many hundreds of millions of times too stupid to understand something that complex. The only way the elites in Washington who want to rule over our lives can track or even pretend to predict something this complex is to control every aspect of it, to have every single economic decision need an approval filed in triplicate at the appropriate government bureau. They must tell you what to do, when to do it, how to do it, all of that in order to ensure that you live your life according to their master plan. And then everything slows down to fit through this intelligence bottleneck until it eventually collapses. And we have seen this time and time and time and time again. My friends, life is not a series of billiard balls on an infinite, frictionless plane where all of the interactions and collisions can be predicted out into infinity. Humans are unpredictable and often unreasonable. Any equation with human nature in it becomes chaotic. 2 humans are chaos squared, and the variables involved in 300 million humans making up the U.S. economy can be described as chaos to the 300 millionth power. The only way to even try to get a handle on such a number and on such complexity is with 300 million individual processors spread out all across the country, each making individual decisions on those events closest to them. 10 processors a few thousand miles away in Washington, even if they're twice as fast as any single one of the 300 million out there, is massively, massively inadequate to the task.